Ceej hopes to use technology and empathetic design to create human-centered change. So with that, let us welcome our speaker, Ceej.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the intro. So hi again, Ceej here. So let me just start sharing my screen. There we go. Yeah. So today I'll be talking about how you can set up a design system on Figma. So again, hi, I am Ceej. I am a founder with a passion for product management, UX, no code, and communities. So currently working on Taiki, Spec Studios, and NextPay, and I'm also building communities or working with communities in OnDeck and Google Developer Student Clubs Loyola. So I'm here to talk about design systems. Yeah, so throughout this workshop, I'll just be giving you guys a brief conceptual and intro to what design systems are, what they're used for, and then I'm gonna give a quick intro as to how to build a design system or like how to start with it on Figma. So before that, what the heck is a design system? It's a word commonly thrown around in different UX communities. If you've seen it, a lot of people talk about it, and some people dread it, some people love it, some people make it their careers. But in the first place, what is a design system, and what is it for? So to summarize in like a single phrase, your design system is a single source of truth. So if everyone here is a product designer, or I assume you guys are familiar with design or at least Figma, you know that when you design different screens, there are different patterns, different components, different forms in the UI that you commonly use and commonly use across the whole product. So having this as your single source of truth allows you to see all elements that allow teams to design. So what does that mean? Through a design system, you have one single file or one single project that allows you to see everything that you need to actually design. And at the same time, this also helps you establish design standards practiced by your entire organization. So let's say you have a design team of 12, or you have a larger design team of around 50. So having a single source of truth allows you to easily onboard people, allows you to easily help them get into the process and understand how designs actually work in the context of the product you're already designing. Kasi syempre, like, when a product is already established, you have some repeating patterns, you have some colors that you already use. And when you join the team for the first time, you'd want to learn about these and you'd want to know how to use them. So a design system isn't just for the current designers, but it's a huge help for new designers joining your organization or team. And one last thing is it's a way for you to scale your product's design. So eventually, like, your product starts getting bigger. Like, for example, when I joined NextPay, we were just a team of 3 and we only had 2 main features. Now we're shipping like 2 or 3 features every 2 sprints, and the product keeps getting bigger and bigger. And it's getting harder for the designers to maintain a consistent design. And it's also getting harder for the front end developers to continue using or just continue developing things from scratch. So your design system is there for you to scale your product's design without you having to go through a lot of barriers, a lot of blockers, and essentially just make things easier for all of you. So it's a lot of stuff, and design systems are actually pretty difficult or have a huge, or not really a huge, but have a curve or have a barrier to work with. So in the first place, why would you even invest in a design system? What is it for? So now I'm going to be showing you guys some quick use cases or some different things that we do with design systems, and I'll be using our work at NextPay as the example. So first, like I mentioned earlier, design systems allow you to create and replicate designs quicker and easier. So if you look at this, these are some of the components that we currently have in our NextPay design system. We have our drop-down component, our buttons, our form fields, our modals, our tables. So with that in mind, people don't have to always build these. People don't need to consistently just create these, don't need to constantly build these from scratch, because there's already an established pattern library or a UI library that allows them to just drag and drop these different components into the screens that they're designing. So when you have all of these different components, it allows you to create and replicate those designs quicker and easier, not just on the designer's end, but even on the developer's end, because for them, it'll also be as easy as inputting some lines of code instead of having to create everything again from scratch. So design systems make things more efficient. They help your team build faster and ship faster. And with that in mind, besides just the speed, it also gives room to create a unified and consistent language. So, syempre, when you build a product, you're going to have so many different screens, right? And the main issue when your product starts to grow is always, how do I keep things consistent? How do I make sure that the design in one page that person A worked on looks like it was worked on by the same person, despite it being on another flow designed by person B? So, with that in mind, you kind of just think, how will you keep things consistent? How will you keep things the same? How will you keep these patterns normal? Or how will you keep them consistent and the same throughout the whole product? So design systems help you do that. Like, I'll show you guys a more clear breakdown later. But the best part about having a design system, or at least a semi-established one, is that you get to focus on the UX overall instead of having to focus on UI or the micro UI stuff every time you work on your designs. So what do I mean by that? Again, let's use these screens for example. When you're a designer, what you want to focus on is how you want your product, or how you want your user to accomplish the goal through the product. Now, especially if you're in an agile environment, or if you're in a startup that tries to work fast, or a team that tries to ship fast, you don't want to have to focus on, oh, I have to make this 16 pixels, or I need my margins to be like this, and then you're gonna forget it. And then in the next part of the product, okay, I have to make the margins like this. Or you don't want to have to create a search bar over and over again, because that's a huge waste of time, not gonna lie. So when you have a design system, you get to focus on your UX overall instead of micro UI interactions. What do I mean by that? You get to focus on the flow. You get to focus on how a user accomplish the tasks, how a user accomplishes the tasks, instead of having to focus on creating these different components, creating these different patterns over and over again. So when you have a design system, like I have some examples here, you can easily switch this component right here between a default type of cell, or a multi-line, a chip, a kebab, a button. Or if you have a button, you can simply change between the sizes, the types, the states, the icons. Or if you have a form field, you can easily just switch between these without you having to create everything again and again and again, allowing you to focus on actually designing the UX, the actual experience, instead of the interface over and over and over again. So with that in mind, there's a lot of talk about design systems. And if you go on Twitter or LinkedIn, there's always people saying, how do I know if or when my team needs a design system? So the thing is, design systems are pretty big projects. When you're in a startup or early stage, you don't want to focus too much time on this because it takes up too many resources and too much time. So you want to understand when it's the right time for you guys to establish a design system. As an example, at NextPay, I'm heading or managing the design system building, but in my startup Taiki, we only have like the bare skeleton of a design system because we're only two designers. We don't fully need it yet, and if we invest too much time in it, we're gonna take forever, and we're not gonna be able to ship products as fast as we want to. So when your team is young and new, maybe start with a simple style and component library, which I'll show you guys later how to do. So what do I mean by this? Just have some set things for your typography, have some set standards for your colors, have some set standards for your grids, and build your base components like your buttons, your form fields, and all that. But you don't have to make things too complex. You don't need to start like fully documenting things yet, because most likely you're just two or three people and it's still easy to communicate. Again, if you invest in the design system early on with the organization or startup that you're working on, you're going to take forever. You're going to take away resources from the actual product. And instead, you're going to be building something for you guys alone. And when you're in a startup, you want to ship as fast as possible. But when your team starts growing, like for example, we went from 3 to 6 people here, you might need to add a bit more documentation. Kaya it's simple lang. What type of buttons to use for which, what spacing or what corner radius to use, what types of form fields are used for what type, how to align buttons in the modal, like those simple stuff to document, just so you have something written and something that your team members can refer to without having to ask every now and then, guys, ano nga ba yung size dapat nito? Or ano nga ba dapat yung margin nito? So this makes your processes a bit more efficient, but you're still not putting too much effort or resources into building the design system because you're still a fairly small team. You don't need something too complex yet because again, I keep saying it, it's going to take a lot of time. But when your team or your product starts to expand to multiple flows and your team gets bigger and bigger, it's time to start governing the system. This is the time when you might need someone to manage your design system. This might be the time when you need a dedicated team to actually build your system for you so the product designers can focus on their actual craft. So what do I mean by that? I'll give you guys an example. When I started at NextPay as a UX design intern, again, we were just three. So I was focused on the craft. I was focused on designing, helped out with maintaining the component library every now and then. But my main focus was on design. Then we onboarded one member, another member, and we started getting bigger. So I started shifting towards the end of my internship. I went from focusing on product work to establishing the grounds for the design system. Because at that time, I thought I was leaving. So by the time my internship ended, we had the foundations of a design system, styles, colors, like in a more documented manner instead of just having them dumped on a Figma file. And we also had some base components to work with that also corresponded with the subtle rebrand that we were doing. So then after 1 month, 1 month after my internship ended, I rejoined the team as a design ops manager. And the reason for that is because when your team starts growing, you don't want your product designers to split their time between craft and process. So this is something I learned from one of the courses I took. When you're in a team, you have two types of people. You have the craft leaders and the process slash people leaders. And with that in mind, you want your designers to actually focus on their craft. You don't want them to have 50% of their time focused on optimizing processes and operations. You don't want them to focus on making the systems because you're not maximizing their you're not maximizing your resources. You're not maximizing the people that are working for you or with you. So you want them to focus on actually designing the product and have someone to focus full time on governing these systems, on creating these processes, on creating these operations. And that was my role in NextPay. Our designers could focus on building products, could focus on shipping new features. While I was there working from the background, fixing the operations, fixing our processes, fixing the workflows, and establishing the design system. That way, we had our craft leaders focus on the craft, and I was the ops guy. I was the process guy. And it's not super fun working from the background, but it does help, and you're gonna see it really fulfilling when you start working on it. So that's basically like when you how to start a design system and when you need to when you that's basically how you start a design system and that's how you know when to start it. So but how do you actually build it like technically? So I want to introduce you guys to the concept of atomic design. So you may have heard of this, but it's basically creating components in the style of atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and then eventually pages. So how does this actually work? Let's say when you start your design system, you have these atoms. You have your icons right here. You may have an X icon. You have how your body text looks like. You have how your header text looks like. You have a form field. And you have a secondary and primary button. So those are all atoms because they're all individual components that are really just the base. So if you think in a dev perspective, these are like the things that you can actually put in HTML semantics like button, input, P, H1. So those are your atoms. Then when you start combining these atoms, the same way that science around natural science works, when you start combining atoms, you form molecules. So this can be a molecule right here. You have a molecule of a header and a body text. You have a molecule of a primary and secondary button. Then eventually, these molecules also come together the same way that natural science works. These molecules come together to form an organism. So these organisms, like for example, this is a modal. It consists of atoms that are put together into molecules and molecules that are put together into an organism. So this model right here is an example of an organism in your design system. Then eventually, you're going to be creating page templates and actual pages to make things look like this. And that's where your design fits into the whole process. So if you actually look at this from a component perspective, all the purple things are components. You have a molecule here of a table column. You have an atom of this text right here, and you have molecules of these two types of texts. Or here, you have an organism of this card, you have a molecule of these two things together, and you have an atom of these two separate types of text. In your navbar, this is a whole organism. You have your molecule of a section of the navbar, which is this one right here. Then you have atoms of each of those individual texts in the navbar. So let's go through that again. You start with your atoms, you make them into molecules, you form organisms, then you put them into templates or pages. And that's how components technically work or basically work. And that's the foundation of what the workshop is that we're going to be doing today. But before that, I want to show you guys some examples of really popular design systems that you might be able to use when you start or kick off your design projects. So first, Material UI, very like it's one of the most foundational design systems you can find. Basically, just drag and drop these different components. You can find it on the Figma community library. You have Untitled UI, which is a personal favorite, like really pretty, really simple, works with auto layout, uses variants, and accessibility check na rin siya. You have Pegasus, really another pretty design system. Atlassian, they have really great principles and design values, design guidelines and all that, not just components. You also have Polaris, which functions the same. Like you have guiding principles, you have really good documentation, you have really useful and helpful components, and really just helps you build thoroughly and easily. So with that in mind, I'm now going to do a quick workshop as to how to build your design systems, or like at least the way I do it. So if you guys have your Figma open right now, feel free to follow along or try it on your own. I'll send you guys a link to this, and you can duplicate it if you want. Let me send it to the chat. Okay. So first, like I mentioned earlier, the first thing you want to do is set up your styles. So a personal favorite of mine is this plugin called Styler. So the reason I super love this plugin is because it makes it super easy for me to establish something in all my projects, like very easily. What do I mean? So I'll first introduce you guys to the concept of styles. So let's say I have my body text here, and I want it to be size 16 with a line height of 32. Then I want to have my header text, let's say size 40 with a line height of 56 and bold. So I'm gonna have, what you wanna do is create this into a style. Because syempre, for example, you have a product with all of these different headers na, right? And then suddenly, crap, I wanna make my header, ano pala, like instead of size 40, I want it to be 32. So you're gonna have to change these one by one. And trust me, you don't wanna do that. I did that with a project once. Actually, my first ever client work. My friends and I were working, and we decided to change the font, like towards the end of the project. And we didn't use any styles. So we had to go through all of those 60 plus screens and change all the fonts because we were handing it over to our client like 3 days from then. So how do styles help you? If you go and click on this text right here, you'll find 4 dots here in the upper, like in the text area in your toolbar. So you want to create a style and maybe title this my header font, right? So that way, let's say I have a text here that's a different size. Let's say it's like 10 right now and auto. So if I just select these 4 dots here and click on header font, they're going to turn into the same styles that you set with your body text. So now, what if I want to change nga my ano? Let me just set these two to the same style. So what if I want to change my font size? Instead of 40, I want it to be 32. So if I turn this to 32 and 48, you'll notice that they all change. And that means like, it's easy to maintain it and keep it consistent throughout the whole product. Now, similarly, I can do this here with the body text. So if I label this body, there we go, and duplicate this, and then suddenly I decide, oops, I want my body to be size 18. It changes all of them just like that. Now, the hassle part is every time you have a new project, you don't want to set all of these up. heck, I don't want to do this. So I created this template for myself, like in one of my files that outlines desktop sizes and mobile sizes. So using this together with your styler plugin, it's a godsend. So let me demonstrate how to do it. So what I'm gonna do is select all of these. So these are already stuff that I preset. Like in most of my projects, like let's say 48 is my platform H1, 40 is my platform H2, my platform H3 is 32. And that's kind of a standard that I set for all my personal projects. So what I want to do is select all of these. Look for your styler. Oops. Wait. Okay. Look for your styler plugin and then click on generate styles. Okay. Now, once I unselect this, my Figma is lagging. There we go. So let's do, if you look here, they're all there now. Body XS, body S, body large, body XL, H6, H5, H4, H3, H2, H1, right? So how many styles though? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 times 4. So imagine having to do 44 of those manually. Hassle, diba? So I made this template to allow me to do that. Para I can auto-generate these styles for all the projects I work on. And use this template na rin if you want to change like the text sizes, like for example, make this 56 before you generate the styles, feel free to do that. But that's basically how it works. And I also made one for mobile. So let's say I do the same thing, styler, generate styles. It creates all of those for me. And in less than 10 seconds or in less than 20 seconds, I created 88 different textiles for me. And that really helps a lot because I'm very timid. And you can also do that same thing for colors. So I pre-name these na. Basically, what you have to do lang pala is you have to name these layers. So for example, desktop H1 bold, desktop H1 semi-bold. So you have to name your layers like that para styler will recognize them. So for example, here naman, I have red 50 all the way to red 900. So if I select all of these and generator styles, styler is going to do it for me. And you'll see that I have it here na rin. That easy. So basically, that's what the first thing that you want to do when you build a design system. Set all these styles. Set your text styles, and then set up your colors. So that way, if I'm going to design a UI, let's say this one, all I have to do is select here, and then maybe have a text here na gusto ko H3. There we go. So it's going to be that simple now, and you won't have to memorize all your different styles nor your different line heights all the time. So download Styler, best or like one of my favorite plugins as a design system manager. Yeah. So after this naman, you want to set up your grid systems. So optional, but highly recommended as someone who's very OC with grids. So when you have grid systems kasi, it makes your designs look cleaner and more organized in general. So for example, what you want to do is add a layout grid and then columns. Then that's where you determine. Now, normally my go-to is, for especially for desktop, my go-to is 12 columns with a 144 margin and 24 gutter. So what are those? Your margin is the space between the sides and the actual start of the grid system. So these are your margins. Then the gutter would be these 24 pixels right here, or the column, the space between your columns. So this is a personal preference lang of mine, setting it up as 12, 144, 24. But syempre, it depends on the brand or the style of the project that you're working with. Like for example, right now I'm working on an NFT minting site and they want it to be thin. So I think we made it 240. So that way all the content is here and you have a lot of white space. So we set these up because it helps you keep your designs clean. So let's compare kunwari magde-design ako without without a grid system and with. So without the grid system, I'm gonna make cards like for example, something like this, 24, something like that, right? And then I'm gonna make more. Let's say gusto ko naman for this column, I wanted to have 4 cards, but I don't know where to make it follow. So I'm gonna make it something like this. Yeah. So essentially, my point is having a grid can make it easier for you and can make your design cleaner. So let's say I want 3 columns. All I have to do is like follow these grids right here, and I'll be able to do it that easily. And then for my next row, I want it to be 2 columns. So I'm gonna put 24 space between them, and then extend it like this. And then for the next one, I want um sorry, my math is lagging. 4 columns. So I just have to do it like this, Ren. Sorry, wait. And that way, after you establish a grid system, you can easily keep it as clean as this. Also, I type Control-Shift-4 to hide the grid, to hide and show the grid. So you can see it's clean, it's organized, it's easy on the eyes, and that's essentially how you want to build your designs as a UI designer. So I normally set these grids up and then I add them again as styles. So let's say this is my desktop grid, and then I'm going to make a mobile one too. My personal preference naman for mobile is, was it 6? Yeah, 6 with 24 margin and 24 gutter. So this one's my personal preference, but you can also make it 16. Oops. There we go. And then I'm going to add this and then make this mobile. So that way, throughout your project, like you can just follow the same grid system and things are going to look clean and organized. Then now, after you set those basic styles, like you can also set up shadows pala. Forgot to add that here. But essentially, like for example, I have this white box right here. All you have to do is click on effects and play around with your drop shadow. So UI tip, never use the default shadow. It's not that nice. So let's say I want the blur to be 10 and I want the opacity to be 10%. So let's say I'm going to use this shadow. Still looks a little thick to me. So I'll make it 5 there. So what you want to do is also add this as a style. So now I'm going to have this as my shadow style. And voila. If I want to change this, then I can simply just go here and then let's say suddenly, oh, I want it to be blue. So in the same way, so styles basically all work the same. Just add them as styles and you'll be able to edit them from your style definition right here. So now that you have the styles in place, these are your basic building blocks. It's time to build your components now. So as you can see here, I have this whole button system. So I'll teach you guys the concept of base components muna. The reason personally, I use base components because I want to be able to change all of that without me having to go through them one by one. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but all of them are changing when I change something in the base component. So first of all, let's say I'm going to build a button. Let's make a new one right here. And I want my button to use this font that I set kanina. So let's say 1624 semi-bold. Now, I can't go deep into the concepts of auto layout. I think that's out of scope for this workshop. But I'll show you guys. Basically, this is how I build buttons with auto layout. So let's say I want my top and bottom to have 8 padding, and then I want my left and right to have 24. Then I'll add, let's say, anong color? Let's use the next big color na lang. There we go. So that is my button. So I'm gonna turn this into a component. So that's Command Option K, or you can just right click and do select create component. And I'm gonna name this .base/button. So what's the reason for naming it .base? The thing is, design systems kasi are usually published across your entire team. And while these base components help you as a designer, your designers don't care about them. So all you want them to see is the actual final product or the final component of the button. And the way to do that is if you want to create a component but hide it from being published, just add a dot or an underscore, underline, underscore before the component's name, and it will hide when you publish it. So now that we have this base component, I'm going to duplicate it and create child components first. So say I have these three child components. Um, so for this one, I want this to be my default. This one, I want it to be my hover. So let's like make it a little lighter. And then this one, I want this to be my disabled. So let's just make it like this. Then what you want to do is rename these buttons. So let's say I'm going to call this button default, and then this one into button hover, and then this one into button disabled. Okay. So now I'm going to turn these into a component set. All you have to do is select all these three, click here, and create component set. Then that way, you have your component with variants now. So when we say variants, it's an easy way for you to switch between component styles. I remember being there when variants was released, and I was fanboying all over with my teammates at NextPay and with my friends at like DSC and UX SOC, I think. So basically, these variants allow you to play around and just switch between these different styles. Now, if you take it up a notch, you can build something as complex as this, wherein you have three different sizes, large, medium, small, three different types, primary, secondary, tertiary, five different states, default, hover, focused, pressed, disabled, and then variations with icons on them. So if you notice here, kasi the base components actually have icons in them. And then what I did na lang after that was when I go here, you'll see that they're actually just hidden. So when you have a base component kasi, you want to try to have everything there na, and then just hide them as you go through the different variants that you're going to make. So again, this is a personal practice. I'm not going to say it's the best or it's an industry standard, but it works for NextPay and it works for all the teams I've worked with so far. So if that's something you guys want to try out, I learned base components from the founder of Figma Academy, si Rudd. I forgot his first name. But basically, yeah. Um, so this is how I use base components. Now, for example, I want to change pala my font. Like I don't want it to be this. I want it to be something else instead. If I didn't have my base components, I'd have to select all of these variants one by one, and then I'd have to change their fonts. But thanks to my base components, I only have to change these three things corresponding to their sizes. These two na lang muna. And then I'll make this one, oh, it's the wrong one. I'll make this 16 and semi-bold. And then this one, I'll make this 14 and semi-bold. And there you have it. It changed everything that easily without you having to select all of it. So that's really the main use of the base component. And another thing is it helps you with retaining the text when you switch between variants. What do I mean by that? So because the issue kasi with variants sometimes is, let's say I have a text here that says view my document, I don't know. And if I change between variants, they're gonna disappear. But the way that you keep these variants consistent is by making sure that each of these components inside the variant set have the exact same layers inside of them. So if you look, like it's the exact same button, button, button. And that way, when I switch it, that's a fail. What did I do wrong? Wait lang. Let me just check. Oh, okay. So it's this one kasi. Their names are different here. So I made a mistake there. So what you want to do kasi is make sure that they all have the same name. So they should be, I don't know what changed, but they should all be base dot button. I mean dot base slash button. That way this should work now. There we go. See, I demonstrated an error and then I fixed it. But basically, you want to make sure that all the names of your layers are the same, exactly the same throughout all the variants. And that way, like when you switch between them, they're gonna stay the same, right? So once you get used to how base components work and how to create variants, you can build something as complex as this. And there was at one point, like I'd say it was component overload, but my team needed it. I built around 160 variants of a form field for them. Yeah. And I died. But this one's 135 variants. So duplicate lang yan, but it works and it helps them. So what's the end result of this? If I use a button in my design, I can easily switch between large, medium, and small. I can make it secondary, I can make it tertiary without supposedly without the text being affected. Okay, see, medium, large, and then you have your hover, you have your focus, you have your disabled. So that makes it easier on your designer's end. Like on your end as this design system person, it's hell. But your job as a design system guy or a girl is really for you to make the experience easier for your product designers. You're essentially building a product for your team. And as usual, as UX designers, you want to make the experience easier. So do your research, ask them what practices they want to implement, and then base it off of that. On my end, like they didn't want to have to manually resize the button. So I even added like but size variants to make it easier for them. At the same time, they didn't want to have to change the colors all the time, so I added these state variants for them to use and play around with. And then in terms of icons, we have the leading and the trailing type of icon. I can show you guys the form fields variants later, like towards the end now. So that's how I built the button. That's how I built the atom. Now let's say like we have a few more things. Like let's actually move this here. So we have our ano na. Let me just make this tertiary and default. Okay, so we have our base component in here. So now what I'm gonna do is turn it into organism. So we have a bunch of atoms here. We have the logo, we have the name, we have the title, we have the description, and we have an image. So from these atoms, let's form a molecule. So I'm gonna make these three into a molecule because they're all text naman. So I put them in an auto layout through Shift A. Won't go deep into that. And then I want an image here. And then I want an image. I want the logo like somewhere here. So let's try this one. There, but maybe 16 here. So as you can see, they all went from individual atoms, and now we're trying to form some sort of ano na, some sort of an organism. So with that in mind, like if you look here, now I'm gonna auto layout these again, and then let's say I'll add 24 space between them and make this view more. I'm not gonna change the icon, but let's pretend it's a chevron. And then if I group these together, let's remove the logo muna and make the 0. Let's add some padding here pala. So I'm not gonna go deep into how auto layout works, but try learning it if you haven't. It's really great and easy to use and super fun. So now I have a simple card component right here. Okay, padding's too big. I'll make it 16. And then let's make this fill container. There we go. So as you can see, they all went from individual atoms into this more structured organism. Now let's say I want to add the logo. Let's put it here na lang. So there we go. Now, let's say I want ano pala, I want another type of variant na walang image. So all I have to do is make this into a base component. So let's say dot base slash card. And then I'm going to duplicate this twice. This one's my variant with an image, and this one's the variant without an image. And then I'm going to turn these two into a component set. And there you go. You have your card component. I'm going to name this my cards. And then this one is another thing you can do with variants is make it a switch. So what do I mean by that? Try playing around with true or false. So for example, you have a property that only has two different types. Let's say this one is with and without an image. You can make it true and false. And then rename the property to something like with image. And if I use this component, you can just toggle here. So it won't be a drop-down selector anymore. It'll just be a simple toggle that allows you to add or remove an image. So that's how you can build like a basic card component. So as you can see, like it's really part of my practice to create base components. Though if it doesn't fit in your workflow, then don't. Like this is just my personal preference. And I'll also show you guys how to build a modal. So we have how many? 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 atoms right here, and I'll turn them into molecules naman. So let's say these two, I want them to go together, and then there we go. Sorry, I think my headphone shut off. Okay. And then these two, I'll put them together. So that's another molecule. And then, yeah. So with that in mind, let's turn this into a component. So we had our atoms kanina. We now have 2 molecules with these atoms. Now let's combine them. I'll combine these 3 and no, these 2 muna. And then combined with that, I'll make this right aligned sa baba. So it would look like this. So again, not gonna dive deep into auto layout for now. For this one, maybe I want it to be centered. So let's make this centered. And then this one, I also want this to be centered together with the rest of the components. So I'm gonna auto layout these and turn it to that. And then I'm gonna add this in like this. So another auto layout, maybe, and then put it to the right. And then we can add like 16 or 24 padding on all sides and add a fill. And there you have it. You have a simple modal. So that was pretty quick, but essentially what I did was I combined different atoms together to form molecules, combined some molecules together to form organism, and then now we have this whole thing. And when you put this into a page, like I demonstrated kanina, then it'll be like easy for you to just use this over and over again in your designs. Then eventually, like let's say I want a template section. So for example, I'm gonna have a section that's this long, and then kunwari that section will have 3 cards palagi. So I'm gonna center this long real quick. Add a shadow. So let's add a shadow to the main component. So if you see, I'm gonna add a shadow here, and then now it added to here, 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 and here. So I'm gonna duplicate this again. Let's say I want them 24 apart from each other. Center. Then this can be no, this can be a section template. So in the context of a bigger page, like for example, let's add a whole screen. I just have to duplicate or like I'm gonna make this into a component first. This is a 4-card section. All I have to do is duplicate this here, and then wait, what's the screen size of this? 1512. Okay, so that way I have a section built in here, and then I can just drag and drop it to different parts of my design. So yeah, so basically I showed you guys like the process from atoms to molecules to organisms for these two, and then building them into sections and templates, then eventually into fully like full pages. So that's essentially like a quick run through of how I personally build my design systems. And if that's something that you see that can fit in your workflow, then go ahead and try it out. I sent the file to you guys, so feel free to just duplicate this and play around with it. Especially this. This is a godsend. Like for me at least, this template, it's been making it easier for me to go through my different projects easier without having to manually set up all those styles. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for that part naman. And yeah, so it's actually it for me. So thanks for listening. You can find me on these social links right here. And feel free to ask me questions. Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you again, Siege. Very insightful yung workshop. So, um, do anyone have any questions for our speaker? If you have, you can ask it now. Hmm. Okay. Okay. Oh, someone learned base components. Yeah, it's very helpful from what our speaker said. Nah, if you can comment it out in the end, something like that. Okay, so before we end, please answer our post eval here. Oh, okay. So with that, thank you again, Ceej, for sharing tips and insights on design using Figma.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, UX Hub. Yeah.
And that is for today. So please just answer the eval forms na lang. If you're done. If you have any more question, you can still ask naman. Also answer it. My favorite information slide about comic design.